Welcome back. We're talking about a story from Latin America, Central America to be specific, the country of Guatemala, that has interesting implications for our vital interests in that part of the world, to be sure, but are also very instructive in terms of what the deep state, as it's been called, the administrative state, the permanent bureaucracy, the foreign service, in the case of the State Department, is able to do, sometimes with the approval and oversight of the elected officials and appointed officials of the government, and sometimes just on their own. And we're talking with Stephen Hecht, a businessman, been in Guatemala for 5 decades and has watched firsthand and closely and been documenting in videos and in many, many articles the story of what our State Department has been doing to undermine liberty in a friendly democratic nation. So, Steve, pick up the story here as to when this very problematic attorney general was unable to be reappointed in Guatemala, the favorite of the State Department and Hillary Clinton and her team and so on. What happened then?
The State Department used a UN created organization called the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, abbreviated CICIG, that was the Guatemalan state and the United Nations created it, but it was not part of the UN. And it was something that was promoted largely by George Soros from behind, of course. And then they managed to co-opt.
The theme of it being to root out endemic corruption and hold people who are perpetrating it accountable and thereby clean up the societies. I mean, this is the narrative, right?
Well, that's the general idea. It morphed into that. It was specific. It was created to specifically identify and dismantle clandestine security groups that deprived the Guatemalans of their basic rights and were beyond the reach of the law. And they became exactly what they were set to eliminate, except that they weren't clandestine. They were out front. Everybody could see it.
So this is a kind of residual agenda of the communist efforts to subvert the country, I guess.
Yes, that's correct. The CICIG
Okay.
was the battering ram of the State Department to subdue Guatemala. They would put people in jail who did nothing. If they didn't like a judge, they created one time a list of corrupt judges so
Now,
that
when
they
you
could
say
win.
they, you're talking about this CICIG
Yeah,
group, not our State Department.
yeah, I'm
But
talking about our State Department.
through CICIG
That's
and its
right.
operations in the country.
That's
Okay, so what? Again, just give us a first person, eyewitness account of this. What were the implications for the elected government of Guatemala, for the preferences of the people of Guatemala, that all of this is going on
well drastic because
unaccountably?
in 2016, the State Department, through its ambassador Todd Robinson, who's now an assistant secretary of state, uh, he took over Guatemala's highest court, the court of last resort, its constitutional court, and he bullied, threatened members of Guatemala's Congress to name this woman, Gloria Porras, to the High Court, where she was the strong woman, and she would tell other magistrates, this is what the U.S. ambassador wants. So they had criminal prosecution, and they had the High Court, and they were in the process of dismantling Guatemala state and making it a centralized uh, government that exercised arbitrary power. That's where they were going.
All right, so let me just make sure I got this right. You're telling us that the U.S. ambassador to this small nation in Central America, Guatemala, by the name of Todd Robinson, was actually directly interfering in the internal affairs of that government to the point where he was specifying who would be serving on the highest court in the country and the kinds of policies that that court would be promulgating as a result, to the detriment of democracy in this country. Have I got that right?
You have it exactly right. And it's even worse than that because once he was in that position, uh, you could call him the proconsul. He was the ruler of Guatemala. He had more power than the president. Matter of fact, he told the president who to name as ministers, and he basically could control anything he wanted in that country.
Now, who is this guy? Todd Robinson. Is he a Foreign Service career uh,
Yes,
figure who
yes.
has fleeted up to the rank of ambassador? You mentioned that he's now the Assistant Secretary of State. What is his portfolio at the moment?
For international narcotics and law enforcement.
So that would continue to give him the ability to reach into places like Guatemala, but around the world,
Absolutely.
and advance an agenda that I guess, is it fair to say this is his personal agenda, obviously, but has he got any authority to be imposing this kind of diktat?
Well, certainly he has no authority for that. I mean, as far as I can see, well, he's obviously not alone. One person can't possibly do all this. But there seems, in my opinion, there is a group of permanent bureaucrats inside the State Department that runs policy. And if they like what the administration policy is, they'll do it, like today. And if they don't like it, they'll undermine it, like they did with Trump.
Yeah. So we have Todd Robinson, and he is using as a cudgel, a battering ram, as you put it, this corruption narrative
Right.
and various mechanisms. Is this CSIG, as you call it, still operating? Is he still involved in Guatemala? And is the character of the country being, uh, well, morphed uh, in line with this kind of agenda?
Well, as you can imagine, Guatemalans didn't take kindly to having their country run this way. And and in the current government in Guatemala, the Jamate administration, they resisted, and they refused to reappoint Gloria Porras to the court, and they appointed judges who were not part of the State Department group of local officials, cabal, right? And the same thing happened in the prosecutor general's office. And the Morales administration, for its first 2 years, had Robinson plants inside the government. And when Guatemala moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was the only other country besides the United States that did that at that time.
After Donald Trump took the initiative.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
they moved that they announced their move shortly after. Guatemala has always had excellent relations with Israel, and so that caused the State Department to become extremely nervous because they wanted to make sure they kept Donald Trump and President Jimmy Morales of Guatemala apart from each other. So they created false corruption charges against Morales and then told the Trump administration to be careful because Morales was corrupt. Naturally, they didn't tell him they were behind the corruption charges. Because if Trump and Morales had gotten together, they could have significantly reduced illegal immigration and the flow of illegal drugs and helped Guatemala develop and become a sustainable democracy. And that's absolutely not what the State Department wanted.
Again, this is stunning, really, when you think about it. And also, as you were talking, Steve Hecht, I was thinking, the rap on America is that it is this Yankee imperialist
Yeah.
in Latin America. if ever there were an example of it, this is it, it would seem to me. And
Correct.
yet it's being couched, I guess, as, somehow an agenda of the left and therefore not imperialistic, not, imposing the will of Uncle Sam on the people of that country. To the contrary, in fact, it sounds as though the people of that country wanted no part of all of this, right?
That's true, and what you're absolutely right. What we could see right here at home that the Biden administration considers its enemies, insurrectionists, white supremacists, etc. Down there, they use corruption as the main demonizer. So they're fighting
For
corruption.
othering, as it's called,
Yeah,
the
and
people that they want to put out of business.
right, and they consider themselves pure and their enemies evil, and everything they do is justified. The end justify the means because they're superior to us.
Right. Well, also because they're Marxists, I think it's fair to
Well,
say.
that's the reason.
that's and that's kind of the leitmotif of the Marxist playbook: is
That's
the
it.
ends justify the means. Steve, we have to take another break here for a moment, and when we come back, I want to ask you a bit more about uh, what this, well, I've called it microcosm, this this paradigm says about more broadly the administrative state operating in our country to the detriment of the interests of the American people and without any accountability at all. And we're going to get into that and then what we can do about it with Steve Hecht, businessman based in Guatemala. We'll be right back.